In 2002, a forgotten chapter in the terrifying Resident Evil franchise is revealed in the shape of Resident Evil 0, a convoluted mess that almost ruins what has already been established in the past. It has been such a spooky treat to be able to play all of these Resident Evil games for the very first time, and while I've had some issues with some of them, I still had a great time playing them. 0 on the other hand is just unfun from start to finish. Taking place just a day before the events of the first Resident Evil, we follow Rebecca Chambers, one of the few survivors of the first game along with other STARS Bravo team members, who meet their demise that very same night. The team was sent to the Erclay Mountains to investigate a series of cannibalistic killings, but their helicopter crashed on their way there, causing the crew to split up and search the woods. Rebecca then finds a seemingly abandoned train in the middle of nowhere, full of undead, and comes across Billy Cohen, a convicted felon accused of killing 23 people. With no idea what's going on, the two then decide to team up in order to survive the night. This prequel story to the 1998 mansion incident sets out to explain some of the unanswered questions that were left hanging from both the original and the remake, like revealing the fate of the other Bravo team members. Well, that's what I would say if only the game didn't go completely off the rails, no pun intended, as soon as it started. Instead of a fully realized story that would complement the outstanding 2002 remake, RE0 completely ignored what has already been established by making numerous contradictions, making it extremely hard to get invested in or even follow.
What's going on?
What's worse is that there are 4 different things happening in the story: the Bravo team's investigation, Billy's backstory, Umbrella's backstory, and the 2 playable characters wandering into the research facility. These multiple plot points are all occurring at the same time, with little to no connection to one another. They all just seem to be there to provide unneeded explanations for the events of the remake, or to give a reason why the characters are constantly going to different places. I mean, the main villain doesn't even come face to face with the main characters until the very end, and some don't even appear outside of cutscenes, making it feel like your journey in this nightmarish event was nothing more but fanfiction. The one story that I think they really should have just focused on was the fate of the Bravo team members, as it's essentially the setup of the game. Without it, R1's events might have played out completely different or might not have even happened. Instead, it's just completely forgotten about and never gets a resolution in the game. All characters, excluding Rebecca, Billy, and the goofy main villain, are all irrelevant to the story.
I'm not judging you.
And this subplot is replaced by some random character that was never even mentioned before or after in the franchise. It is such a waste of an opportunity to not feature them in the story as main characters, given that they were the very first people to ever experience this nightmarish event. They had the chance to create the most terrifying Resident Evil story yet, but instead, all we got is a complicated mess. Rebecca Chambers was first introduced in the 1996 original as the youngest member of the Bravo team. She was portrayed as a frightened and inexperienced member, and these traits were retained in the 2002 remake. However, Zero's rendition of her is portrayed almost as a different character entirely. This Rebecca is desensitized to everything going on around her, and is fully capable of protecting herself. She even fought a tyrant all by herself and a giant leech monster. She also came across a lot of evidence that would suggest Umbrella is an evil corporation, with Wesker even mentioned as a member of it, although none of these were ever acknowledged or even hinted at in the remake, making every single thing that you learned and experienced in Zero completely unnecessary and feel like an afterthought. Even its very final scene didn't make that much sense either. Why go to all the trouble of having a sequence in which Rebecca took and wore Bill's dog tag, only to have it completely absent in the remake? Resident Evil 0 is the epitome of pointless. Everything that it tried to add to the bigger picture heavily contradicts the already established canon. It was so poorly told that calling its story terrible would be an understatement. While its story may have been unbearable, at least the game's graphics are absolutely stunning. Every area that you explore looks beautiful, yet still has that dark and gloomy atmospheric look that is associated with the franchise. The train station in particular is just magnificent. It makes excellent use of the new lighting, and there are even some simple animations in the pre-rendered backgrounds that give life to the locations that you visit. Even outside the train, despite the rain, still looks fantastic. It's obvious that a lot of care and effort went into trying to perfect the visuals of this game. They've done such an incredible job with the remastering that sometimes the game doesn't even look like pre-rendered backgrounds anymore. Although it is still far from perfect, the game's aspect ratio would sometimes get in the way of exploration. The beautiful backgrounds spend a lot in every room that you go through when you use the new aspect ratio added for this game, which makes some items that are placed below or above the center very easy to miss, because you have to wait for the camera to slowly pan towards it first. Also, even if I was standing directly above an item, I would often have a difficult time picking it up unless I moved to a different angle. I'm guessing this was due to the wider aspect ratio used for the pre-rendered backgrounds, because this was never an issue with the remake's muddy backgrounds. It's not a huge deal, but it could definitely be annoying to some and could make many players lost. The pre-rendered cutscenes have also been significantly improved compared to the remake. The cutscenes are not as pixelated as the remakes, although it does still look a bit muddy, but at least they all have the same resolution now, making for a more consistent presentation. Although my main issue with it is not the resolution itself, but rather the production quality, as many of the cutscenes look very different from one another. Some look great while others look completely cheesy, and then there's some like this one that lack any kind of lighting or atmosphere compared to the others, making it look cheap and rushed. And again, this is probably just me, but it appears that the characters' faces also changes for each cutscene, which looks very distracting. From the first Resident Evil game until the most recent title at the time, the remake, the gameplay has remained largely unchanged, with just a few minor improvements and additions to each entry. Resident Evil 0 on the other hand has to be the most experimental entry yet, as it incorporates a lot of new ideas and even changes to the franchise's staple mechanics while still using the same formula. One of the biggest changes seen in RE0 is the ability to play as two separate characters simultaneously. Earlier titles had the option of playing as two different characters as well, but this is the first time in the franchise has ever let you take control of two at the same time, and switch between them at any point with a touch of a button. Both characters also have their own unique set of abilities. Rebecca, being the group's medic, can combine herbs and chemicals using her mixing kit, albeit she appears to be weaker compared to her partner due to her size. While Billy can push heavier objects and can take more damage than her, but cannot mix herbs all by himself. It's essentially the same as the original's character differences, except this time, these differences actually encourage you to switch between them and not just use a single character throughout the whole game. The other character will be controlled by the game's AI whilst you're exploring. However, you can still command it to stay behind or move using the right analog stick. Now, commanding two characters may sound difficult, and it is, since if one of them dies, it means game over. But you don't have to worry that much as the AI can handle itself surprisingly well, especially if it's armed with a shotgun. Although, for some reason when you really need their help, they won't do anything at all, and they'll almost always block your path while you're trying to solve a puzzle. It's annoying, but thankfully it only happened to me 3 or 4 times.
We'll see which one of us is gonna die!
But of course, that isn't the only new feature in this entry, as it also features the ability to drop items from anywhere on the map at any moment. This is by far the most significant addition to this entry, as you no longer need to backtrack to the nearest save station just to clear your inventory. If you need more space, you can just drop them from where you are. You also wouldn't have to worry about losing track of where you've dropped an item, as they're also marked on the map. This single mechanic has completely changed the way the game is played massively. It really makes you wonder why it took them this long to implement this feature after 6 centuries in. Now, this simple addition would have been fantastic on its own, but someone on the development team had a brilliant idea of removing all the game's item boxes. Yes, a crucial component in the franchise has been removed, and instead, the dropping mechanic has taken its place. We just can't have two great things, couldn't we, huh, Capcom? Safe rooms of course still exist, albeit they now solely act as a save station. But since there are so many typewriters scattered over the area that you visit anyway, its inclusion felt kind of pointless. On paper, removing the item boxes sounds like a great idea, and would solve the backtracking issues that have plagued the franchise since the first game. Its execution, however, is just beyond poor. While you can drop items from your inventory at any moment, the number of objects that can be placed in a single room is very limited, so you can't even store all of your essential items in one place. The game will literally force you to go to a different room just to do this. If you wish to drop an item to pick up something else, then you'll have to move to another room first, which will require you to sit through a lengthy loading screen, then manage your inventory, finally drop the item, return back to the room that you came in, watch another loading screen, then pick up the item. This makes item management extremely tedious, and the game's pacing suffers as a result. There's just so many back and forth with the characters and locations that the idea of managing your inventory is simply frustrating. At least by using an item box, you can transfer all of the items that you want at your inventory all at once, and you can even collect and hold onto them until the final battle. This quote-unquote solution only made the matters worse, because once you've opened your inventory, you'll never get out of there for more than 3 minutes. It seemed like Capcom was aware of the tediousness of dropping items with a limited inventory, so they decided to provide 12 inventory spaces this time, 6 for each character. Even still, due to some more baffling decisions by Capcom, it often feels like you don't have quite as much as you do. Larger weapons take up 2 spaces in your inventory, and given that some of the items are practically essential in the game, such as the hook shot and of course the shotgun for better chances of survival, you'll still find yourself managing your items, making the large number of spaces practically pointless. Now you might say, oh, why not just drop the bigger items if it bothers you? Well, as someone who was just playing the game for the first time, I had no idea if an item would be useful later, so I was just holding on to them the whole time. And given my past experience with Code Veronica and how it literally punishes you for leaving an item behind that you might have not even realized you'll need, I was definitely scared to leave them. So for almost the entire duration of the game, I basically only had 4 available item slots. And given how puzzle heavy this entry is, needing you to pick up a lot of key items, switching and dropping items every minute or two definitely bored me out of my mind. Zero's item management is an exercise in tediousness. The removal of the item box in the game feels more like a gimmick to drag the game's runtime rather than a well thought out mechanic. But of course, it doesn't stop there, as not only did it remove one of the franchise's gameplay staples, but it also removed one of the remake's significant additions, which is the defensive items. These small weapons were a fantastic addition to the remake, as it helped the player avoid taking cheap hits from enemies that they couldn't see, especially in those tight corridors. As you can see, Zero's entire hour takes place in a very claustrophobic setting, with almost no place to run. This would have been the perfect place to use the defensive items, as the only real way to get to another room is to kill all of the enemies inside, since, again, there's no way to run. And if somehow you don't have any ammo, you'll be forced to take a hit just to move, whether you like it or not. With the defensive items, you can just walk away from a room full of zombies without getting any damage. It's such a simple addition to a stupid design. It's almost as if Zero went out of its way to completely sabotage what all of the remake set out to do. Not only did it butcher the story and remove an important mechanic, but it also messed up its controls. Zero has a different control scheme than the remake, making it very awful to play back to back. There are just so many times, particularly in the early hours of the game, where I would constantly click the wrong button instead of the one that I want. And even if I go to the settings to change the control type, it still doesn't feel right. The remake was able to perfect this, but somehow Zero messed it all up. At least Zero has a few clever and fun puzzles that makes excellent use of the character switching mechanic. The puzzles are no longer as simple as taking an item from one location and using it in another. The 2 characters will be forced to separate and complete some puzzles alone in certain portions of the game. This one's actually requires some thinking and a little bit of patience. Though of course, it being Zero, it still has to include some more eye-browsing ideas. The incredibly stupid dragging puzzle from the first game returns, and it's even more tedious than ever. It's found near the end of the game, and it demands you to switch between 2 characters and perform 2 snail-pace actions. One character must go down and slowly drag 3 crates, while the other must control the thing that's blocking its path. The thing is, when controlling the person above, you will have to inspect an item first, and once you do, you have to see through a lengthy description of what the machine looks like from the character's perspective, before you could actually control it. And again, like I said, you will be switching between them, so you will have to read this long explanation each time. It's incredibly slow and painful, and I haven't even mentioned the dragging part, which is so awful that it took me about 15 minutes. It's horrible. The original RE also had the same issue found in the basement lab where you had to drag 3 crates down a long and boring corridor, and one simple mistake could lead to you redoing everything from the very start. This boring segment has been reduced in the following sequels and even the remake, which features the same puzzle but has been redone to actually be less boring. Meanwhile, here's Zero implementing a very outdated version of the puzzle, complete with the same problem where if you make a single pixel mistake, you have basically screwed yourself over. There's a reason why the following sequels of the original never rely on this anymore, because they kill the pacing. The remake, the franchise's most recent installment at the time, features some of the franchise's most memorable enemies seen up to that point, and it was also their first and last appearance in the canon, which makes the idea of them being the best even better. Zero on the other hand features some of the worst enemies in the franchise that I've ever seen. It's like the entire enemy roster is animal escapists from the experimented Dragon City Zoo. Everything is animal and insect related with no other distinctions. We've got giant bats, giant scorpion, giant centipede, giant leeches. They're all giants and animals. Previous entries also had other giant animals as an enemy, like Yon and RE2's Sewer Gator. But at least they had more variety. Sure, it had those, but it also had unique and terrifying enemies pursuing you throughout the whole game. But Zero lacks any of that. It doesn't even have the remake's most unique enemy, the Crimson Heads. So there's no kind of tension in the game at all. And the few enemies that they do have are either boring or extremely annoying. These monkey type enemies, yes, another mutated animal, are so annoying to deal with. They always appear in groups and have incredible amount of health. Whenever you're up against them, it's almost impossible to run away scratchless. You'll always be cornered by them. Because of their speed and numbers, every time you manage to land a single hit on them, they'll always take 2 hits in exchange. I mean, what kind of stupidity is that? And the very same can be said for the stupid hunters, which somehow became broken again. It's so easy to get stun locked in this game, it's just so stupid. Before, practically every enemy encounter could be avoided by simply running past them, but that is no longer possible here. When you do try to fight back, it'll always just be you exchanging attacks with the enemy. It's all very stupid, but somehow not as stupid as the game's main villain, who looks like he belongs in an anime. Everything about Zero has been entirely unnecessary or tedious, and it doesn't even go out of its way to create unique enemies. It's almost as though Zero is just satisfied with being a failure. One of the main reasons why I started this channel was to really just have an excuse to play these classic games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil. What I wasn't expecting though was for the RE franchise's quality to drop this quickly. Sure, there's RE Survivor, but it never frustrated me the way Zero did. Just everything about it feels so wrong, and when they do something right, it's always overshadowed by its bigger flaws. The story is nonsensical fanfiction written for Rebecca. The gameplay is tedious as hell, and it has stupid outdated mechanics straight out of 1996. There's barely anything redeemable about this game. It's easily the franchise's worst and most boring mainline installment, period. Never before have I played such a boring survival horror game.